In the forgotten lanes of medieval Europe, where mud-covered streets wound between crooked cottages and echoing bell towers cast long shadows over cobblestone squares, people still found reasons to laugh, to dance, and to marvel at the absurdity of life. In an era defined by famine, disease, religious fear, and endless, labor fund was not a luxury, it was a necessity. Villagers and nobles alike clung to moments of joy wherever they could find them, and the ways they entertained themselves were as strange as they were sincere. Picture a sprawling village green where barefoot children chased pigs, greased and squealing, while crowds of villagers howled in delight. Nearby, a blindfolded man spun in dizzy circles trying to break a hanging clay pot filled with honey, while others danced awkwardly to the uneven rhythms of drums and flutes carved from bone and wood. These were not merely games. They were collective releases of tension and toil, a temporary departure from fields full of sweat and hunger. And when the sun dipped low and shadows stretched across stone walls, fires were lit and tales were told under star-studded skies. Puppet shows would travel from town to town, carrying with them outrageous stories of devils, saints, and foolish kings, told with crude humor that would make even today late-night comedians squirm. Men dressed as animals mocked church rituals, while laughter rang through alleys that usually only echoed with cries of pain. At bustling medieval fairs, color exploded from stalls lined with trinkets, herbs, candles, dried fish, and fabrics dyed in strange greens and blues. Wandering performers juggled fire-ate glass, walked tightropes, and told fortunes, while townsfolk bet on cockfights or played games of dice carved from animal bone. These fairs were the heartbeat of medieval joy, bringing news from distant lands, songs from unknown tongues, and ghouls that shimmered like magic to those who had never left their hamlet. But not all fun was innocent or even safe. There was a brutal edge. Too much of the entertainment, and the people of the Middle Ages did not shy away from it. One of the most infamous examples was mob football, a violent no-rules game that took over entire towns as men chased an inflated pig bladder through narrow alleys, over walls, and even across rivers. Fists flew, bones broke, and yet the chaos was cherished as a symbol of community, strength, and masculine pride. And then there were the tournament's grand displays of knightly valor, where heavily armored men charged each other with wooden lances on horseback. The ground shook with each collision and crowds roared. Not unlike modern-day sports fans, some seeking blood, others chivalry, all craving spectacle. The church, too, had its place in this bizarre world of fun, mysteries. Plays were staged on wooden carts rolled into town squares, turning sacred scripture into interactive drama, complete with costumes, animals, crude sound effects, and dramatic lighting. Some priests frowned upon these plays, but others encouraged them, believing that divine truth wrapped in laughter would reach hearts better than sermons. Feasts were another cornerstone of medieval merrymaking. But these gatherings were more than food. They were wild carnivals of the bizarre and the joyous. After tables were cleared, guests competed in storytelling contests where the most outrageous tale won applause. In farting competitions where the loudest blast earned coins and wine. Sometimes nobles hired dwarfs, musicians, and dancing bears to amuse their guests, while jesters juggled sharp knives and delivered cutting jokes about everyone in the room, including the king himself. For the poor, joy often bloomed in simpler spaces around shared fires, where minstrels sang songs of heroes and fools of love, gained and lost, of dragons slain and saints. Martyrethi's stories passed from generation to generation, shaping not only entertainment but identity. Music drifted from every celebration, sometimes hopeful, sometimes mournful, always essential. Dances were communal, often circle-based, with repetitive steps that invited even the shyest child or oldest grandmother to join in. May Day festivals brought the wildest joys of all, celebrating spring. As arrival, villagers would light bonfires, leap through flames, and decorate themselves with flowers, and ribbots. Young lovers would disappear into nearby woods under ancient fertility traditions and return at dawn, giggling, breathless, and social roles melted during these rites. Peasants crowned mock kings. Women dressed as men fools declared bishops, and the world turned itself upside down, if only for a night and a time where social class defined one's entire fate. These brief inversions were more than fun. They were catharsis, reminders that everyone, no matter how poor or powerless, could laugh, could dance, could feel free for a moment, even in a cruel world. The Middle Ages were full of contradictions, and so was its fun. Joy coexisted with pain, violence mingled with play, and deep faith danced hand in hand with irreverent mischief. What might seem barbaric or strange to us was in their eyes precious, fleeting, sacred. Joy was a defiance against death, a rebellion against despair, and a communal act of resilience etched into every smile, stomp, and story. They dared to share beneath the weight of stone towers and starless nights as the rhythm of medieval life drummed on with the sounds of hammers on anvils and sermons in stone. Cathedrals, the heartbeat of entertainment, pulsed loudly in the most unexpected corners of society. Joy never stopped knocking, even in the darkest alleys of the era. The concept of leisure might seem almost alien in a time when waking hours were dominated by labor, disease, war, and worship. But make no mistake, medieval people not only found ways to have fun, they elevated it into a defining thread of their culture, layered with customs, rituals, rebellion, and raw humanity. Imagine for a moment a traveling troupe arriving at a sleepy village, dusty from weeks on the road, bringing laughter, chaos, and color where once there had only been silence. Their arrival was a festival unto itself, the townsfolk gathering wide-eyed to see balance on barrels. Jesters twist their bodies into absurd shapes, and women in brightly dyed skirts sing songs that carried tales of kings, dragons, betrayal, and redemption. Performances weren't merely distractions. They were electric jolts to the soul. They reminded people that even a life defined by routine could burst with surprise. The weirdness of medieval entertainment only deepens the further one digs. Consider the bizarre tradition of animal court trials in which pigs, dogs, or even rats were dressed up and placed before a judge accused of crime, like theft or violence. Sometimes the proceedings were deadly serious, with lawyers appointed and sentences delivered with a straight face. It was law turned performance justice as a twisted kind of theater, and the crowd would watch fascinated, not just by the absurdity, but by the deeper message that even animals in God's kingdom had rules to follow. In castles, noblemen held court feasts, and behind the carved wooden walls of the great halls, games of flirtation, rivalry, and gossip played out as the torches flickered and mead flowed freely. One might witness a dwarf performing handstands on a silver platter while a harpist played a haunting melody in the corner. Jesters often became the center of attention, poking fun at lords and ladies through sharp wit and often dangerous honesty. Their role was sacred and strange. They were both comic relief and social critique, able to say what others could not through laughter. The tightrope between offense and amusement was razor thin, but walked with grace by the cleverest among them. Meanwhile, in rural villages, peasants gathered in open fields to celebrate the shifting of the seasons through age-old festivals. Lamas for harvest, Beltane for fertility, and Samhain for the thinning veil between worlds. These were moments when fear gave way to laughter and firelight danced in people. SI's giant effigies were burned, songs were sung with breathless urgency, and the young and old joined together to weave rituals passed down for generations, often mixing pagan roots with Christian reinterpretation. During these events, strangers became family for one sacred night, and even the poorest among them could feel like kings among equals. Mystery plays continued to bring biblical narratives to life, not in quiet chapels, but in the middle of raucous public squares. Carts transformed into miniature stages moved from town to town, actors dressed as devil's angels, and apostles performed miracles and temptations with passion, sometimes using live animals for added realism or shocking effects that involved smoke bursts or stage tricks. These dramas brought scripture to life in a visceral, unforgettable way, weaving faith and fun into one trembling thread. If the townsfolk laughed or cried during the performance, then the play had succeeded, because emotion was the bridge between belief And understanding another strange favorite pastime involved public executions and punishments, not purely as justice, but as social spectacle. Gallows, beheadings, and floggings were often accompanied by vendors, musicians, and large crowds watching, not with horror, but with something close to fascination. It was brutal, it was tragic, but for many, it was one of the few public events that drew the entire town together. Even in horror, there was ritual. And in ritual, there was a distorted form of entertainment. Taverns provided a daily stage for fun to where ale flowed and voices rose in unison. Men and women played games with dice, sang bawdy songs, challenged one another in contests of strength, of storytelling, and sometimes even recited impromptu poetry meant to impress a stranger or shame. Rival brawls were common, but so were deep belly laughs that shook the smoke-stained ceilings and filled the night with warmth. Tavern culture was raw, loud, unpredictable, and for many, the true heart of medieval joy. One cannot forget the carnival season, the brief window before Lent, when rules vanished and society inverted. Men became women, kings were mocked, fools were crowned as bishops, and sins were not hidden but flaunted as part of the celebration. Sat mixed with sin as people wore masks, told forbidden jokes, and danced in ways that scandalized the pious but delighted the man. It was a time of release of permission to misbehave, in a kind of sacred madness that allowed people to survive the long fasts and quiet that would follow even the darkest of medieval winters. Found moments of light and storytelling. When snow sealed homes shut and hunger loomed, people sat close to hearths and shared tales that kept history alive. Exaggerated adventures, whispered superstitions, and confessions of ghostly visitations passed down from grandparent to grandchild. In those nights, fun became something deeper. Was survival not of the body, but of the spirit and the imagination. Across all these strange customs, entertainments, and rituals, there ran a common thread. Community joy in the Middle Ages was not something consumed alone. It was shared, performed, witnessed, and carried together. The laughter of one person meant nothing if it didn't. To echo across the town square, the weirdness made it all the more memorable. Because in a world defined by rules and hierarchy, fun was where people could break free, if only for a moment. In their bizarre dances, brutal games, absurd plays, and raucous festivals, medieval people left behind a legacy not of silent suffering, but of vibrant living. Proof that even in times of darkness, joy always finds a way to rise from the mud, put on a costume, and dance beneath the stars.